oral questions.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here?
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
WTF.
Hey everyone, quiet down. There's a bulletin on TV.
It's time for a change in this country, my friends. A real change.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
The one we call Canadians.
But let me ask you, Mr. Prime Minister, will there always be a Canada?
There will always be a Canada.
All right, elbows up.
Elbows up.
Hey gang, what's up? Just Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. We have issues in Canada, right? Unless you're completely head in the sand, be aware of this.
Oh, yeah. And now, oral questions, questions orales.
Oral questions, questions orales.
Let's see what's happening in the House of Commons right now. Clown circus at the sausage factory. Let's go.
So I can't show that part or any of this with the music or whatever. We're probably cut out already. Big mistake. Anyways, I'm not thinking straight. So we'll get into some of the other things we had lined
up. Ex-drug addict, your policies will work.
Thank you. What is your story, sir?
My story, well, I started doing drugs when I was 18 with my cousin. Obviously, it just kind of ran in the family.
Yeah.
I got out of it. A couple of years later, I fell in with a bad crowd and moved to the city in my home province, Newfoundland.
Okay.
Moved to St. John's. I started using them with a bunch of people. If it wasn't for the support of my parents, I wouldn't have got out of it.
What drugs were you into, if you don't mind me asking?
Cocaine and crack.
Wow.
They ruined my life. I blocked my entire family out of everything. They did take me back, though.
Wow.
But your policies have what got me on.
Really?
So I really appreciate what you would have done to people who are using. My cousin, unfortunately, he's in a wheelchair due to it now.
Wow.
So we really do appreciate hearing what you would do.
Okay. So you agree with the idea of treatment, recovery, getting people off drugs?
I do, sir.
Good.
I do great.
It's going to be a bright future, and our message to people who are addicted is have hope, hang on, help is on the way.
I will.
Yeah,
I will, and I'm going to spread that message.
Thank you, and we need you. We need you to be. We need your story to be an inspiration to all of the other people out there who are struggling, to know that there is hope on the other side. And it's a superpower. The fact that you have that in your past is actually a superpower, because you've overcome that. You can overcome everything.
Well, I realized that if it wasn't for my parents and God, I mean, Jesus has saved my life. I got baptized last year as well. So without that, I wouldn't be here, possibly.
Absolutely, that's right. What a beautiful story of redemption and hope. Let's go and multiply that story everywhere.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, my friend.
Thank you.
Just before the last U.S. presidential election, the BBC ran this documentary with an edited clip of Donald Trump addressing supporters before the storming of the Capitol in 2021.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Only Trump didn't actually say those words in that way. He said,
we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
The Fight Like Hell section came from a different part of the speech 50 minutes later. On Tuesday, the Telegraph newspaper published a leaked internal BBC review that acknowledged the edit distorted the day's events and represented serious bias. Sunday night, both the head of the BBC, Tim Davie, and the leader of the News and Current Affairs division, Deborah Turness, resigned. There have been some mistakes made, and as Director General, I have to take ultimate responsibility, Davie said in a statement.
There are a series of very serious allegations made, the most serious of which is that there is systemic bias in the way that difficult issues are reported at the BBC.
In February, the BBC aired and then pulled a documentary featuring a teen trying to survive the Gaza war, who, as it turns out, was the son of a Hamas official, which the broadcaster didn't initially say. A mistake the BBC can't afford to make, says this former head of its news division.
And the BBC has lots of enemies out there. Now, that happens. I mean, the BBC has to live with that. What it then has to do, of course, is be as good as it possibly can be.
In her departure statement, Deborah Turness pushed back, saying that while mistakes were made, the accusation that the BBC is institutionally biased is wrong. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
I am really
Okay, I'm going to step in here. I don't like interrupting very often, but Andrew Lawton is one MP that's got a set on him. He's amazing. Like, he established himself as a media presence, but then he switched over into politics, and he drops the bomb here. I can't believe the bravery of this MP. Like, I wish he was my MP. We do have a very interesting committee coming up. It's going to be Gary Anandasangaree, our public safety loser minister. He's a hack, chipmunk, tiger, fake man. Like, he's just a fake human being. He's a loser. Anyhow, we've got that coming up, but we do have some interesting pieces to watch first. So we're going to just continue.
Mr. Chair,
watch Andrew Lawton.
Disappointed
He's
that
amazing.
this conservative motion is necessary. When this Supreme Court decision came down last week, arguing that a mandatory minimum sentence for the possession and acquisition of child sexual abuse and exploitation material was cruel and unusual punishment, I thought this could be and would be a unifying moment for members of Parliament and parliamentarians of all stripes. I actually had a moment of hope that the Liberal government would do the right thing here, say, this is ridiculous, we are going to reintroduce the law at the first available opportunity, and do so using the notwithstanding clause, a key part of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this country, to assert that Parliament, as the democratically elected body by Canadians, gets to have the final say on this, and not an activist judge. And I'll speak to why, very briefly, the mandatory minimum is necessary in the first place. The two offenders that were at the center of this Supreme Court ruling had each of them hundreds of images of child sexual exploitation and abuse material, referred to in the decision as child pornography. One of them, 90% of the images were depicting young girls between the ages of 3 and 6 years old, some of which showing them being, quote, subjected to acts of penetration and sodomy committed by adults and minors. The other offender as well had hundreds of images and videos of children from 5 to 10, quote, being subjected to sexual abuse such as fellatio and vaginal and anal penetration by adults. Now, the judge at the trial stage gave the first offender the bare minimum, 90 days imprisonment to be served intermittently at his convenience, and 9 months of imprisonment. The second offender was given very similar, in fact, identical sentence there. Without a mandatory minimum, that sentence, which is already in and of itself offensively low, may have been even lower. That is why a mandatory minimum sentence is necessary. And that is why we are calling on this House to reintroduce this legislation with the notwithstanding clause. I was a victim of sexual abuse as a child. And to my knowledge, there are no photos or videos of that. And I hope that that will end up being true. Child sexual exploitation and abuse material does not exist on a computer screen with the person who possesses it only. There are victims, hundreds of victims of this. There is a market for this. The government needs to send the strictest possible penalty, the strongest possible message in denouncing this. This should not be a partisan issue. This should be something that every member of this committee, Liberal, Bloc, and Conservative, can support, regardless of what the Minister of Justice has said on this, that we call on the House to do the right thing and protect children. Thank you.
States like Texas and Florida are going to be the beneficiaries of this exodus out of New York.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. We've discussed before, Rita, that, you know, in the US, the federal system is one of the great geniuses of it is that it makes it very easy to move around the US, different states, looking for work, looking for cheaper housing, looking for better standard or quality of living, looking for places with less crime and so on. It's very easy to do in the US in a way that it isn't in.
So again, sorry to interrupt. That's not the greatest video. I've lost a lot of respect for this guy. I read a couple of his books, and now I'm just not in the mood. But what I am in the mood to do is to tell a story about. I was never. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I've got somebody knocking at the door.
In most other countries. When Governor Abbott said that, I mean, I take it with a pinch of salt, but there's a serious point, by the way, behind that, which is when there have been exoduses of people from, for instance, progressive states, liberal states like California in the past, you see a phenomenon that occurs in other countries too, but it's very stark in America, where people end up leaving a place where the policies they have effectively voted for most of their lives come into effect, make their lives worse. And then some people who can flee to a place that has more conservative politics, but they bring their liberal politics with them. You can see that, and you can see that in Texas, where many people from California fled California. They go to places like Austin, Texas, and they keep voting Democrat. So it's I can understand Governor Abbott's slight.
Sorry, everybody. Back to where we were. I had a courier just drop something off. Anyhow, so when I was 12 years old, I was invited by a man from our community. We live very rurally here in Nova Scotia. And like northeastern mainland, Nova Scotia, Guysborough County, in Guysborough. Anyhow, so I was invited by this man to go water skiing, which...
Question period. Against the backdrop of Donald Trump's trade war with Canada, the federal government is re-engaging with China, insisting the two countries can form what Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister calls a strategic partnership. A message Prime Minister Mark Carney echoed when he met recently with China's president. Carney describing the moment as a, quote, turning point. But former Canadian diplomat Michael Kovrig, who was detained by China for more than 1,000 days, is urging caution. Mr. Kovrig is with me in studio right now. Hello, nice to see you again. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you, Vashi.
I wanted to start off, if I could, on that concept of strategic partnership. When you hear that term, what does it signify to you?
So strategic partnership is actually a specific term that China uses, sometimes with other modifiers like comprehensive strategic partnership. It's a kind of diplomatic code for where you rank in your formalized relationship with the Communist Party state and with China in its diplomacy. So it really just means it's a framework, but it doesn't actually have any particular substantive consequences, and it doesn't mean there's actually a strategy. It's rather just sort of a diplomatic way of saying we will try to manage this relationship in a way that advances our interests. But it's important in the sense that it's a signal from the top, from Xi Jinping himself to the bureaucracy beneath him, to say, if there are irritants and problems in this relationship, let's try to manage them diplomatically.
The Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, who employed that term following her visit to China, told the Canadian press that to her, what a strategic partnership entails, it means going beyond, and this is somewhat similar to what you said, allowing individual irritants to strain the entire relationship and permitting Canada to advance its economic and security interests. Do you see, outside of the potential economic benefits of being able to turn to China where the U.S. is no longer viable, do you see other areas of, of interest where there is convergence between Canada and China?
So let's be clear on what the parameters of this is, right? China is pursuing an agenda that in many respects is adversarial and problematic for Canada and for every Western democracy. So that's the backdrop to this, right? One of the most obvious elements is its full-on backing of Russia in its invasion of Ukraine, which in addition to costing Ukraine tragic amounts of casualties and economic damage, for Canada has cost Canadian taxpayers over $20 billion in support to Ukraine. China could have stopped that war years ago if it had wanted to withdraw that support. And that's just one of many things that China continues to do that are highly problematic for Canada. But against that backdrop, Canada is still trying to advance its interests, particularly economically, and to look for alternatives, right? The key is diversification to balance relations with the U.S., to reduce those dependencies. And the Indo-Pacific region is the biggest, most economically dynamic region in the world. It's not just China. There's a lot more to Asia than China, but China can be a part of that. And I think what the Carney administration is trying to do is look for bounded cooperation opportunities that can advance Canadian interests. The challenge is to do those in such a way that we don't compromise on sovereignty, on our freedom of action in terms of foreign policy or freedom of speech, and on any other aspects of national security. And so what Minister Anand and the Prime Minister need to do is chart a course that looks for advantages and leverage.
One of the aspects of the trade relationship that is certainly, and we've spoken about it before, that certainly was the big story heading into that was, a few weeks before the trip, the ambassador from China had sat in that seat and said, essentially, if you guys take these EV tariffs away, we will take away our agricultural tariffs, establishing a very specific quid pro quo. That hasn't yet materialized. I know that in the past you had warned against doing that because of the signal that it would send. Do you see any optimism in the fact that we haven't yet conceded on that in your advice to the government as they navigate this?
I mean, the elephant in that room, of course, is the American position, right? Donald Trump has lately been talking about doing things that would completely disconnect the North American auto sector. If that, I don't think that's likely to happen, but if it really did, it would completely change the paradigm. So to a great extent, I think there's a waiting and see approach. Canada has said that it is going to review those tariffs and so on now. I think there might be space for recalibrating them, but the preferable scenario for Canada would be to shift that tendency more toward potential investments rather than pure trade. Because let's be clear, this is not even though the Chinese ambassador is presenting this as a quid pro quo, it's not a real one. Canada imposed those tariffs because the Chinese economic distortion distortions are resulting in a massive dumping and overproduction, not just of electric vehicles, but of industrial products in general. This is an economic distortion that's a result of their political economy.
Do you foresee any world in which China stops those kinds of practices? And I ask you because we're now facing a situation where there are many people in this country who are writing op-eds and advocating for turning directly to China in a commensurate fashion, in a commensurate way to the degree we turn away from the U.S.
Right. I would strongly avoid that framework, frankly. Diversification is, I think that's really the bedrock of Mark Carney's economic strategy as far as increasing Canada's resilience and reducing dependencies. We do want to reduce the extreme dependency we have on the U.S. market, but let's face it, it's always going to be there to some extent. We can just try to mitigate it. And he seems to have a 10-year plan to try to do that. I think that's realistic. Making China the core of that strategy, not a good idea, because it's not geopolitically a reliable partner, and as it's demonstrated time and again, if you create dependency on China, it will weaponize it for political purposes and to silence Canada and constrain our foreign policy. So what you need instead is diversification across multiple partners. If you increase trade to China, but at the same time you increase trade with Indonesia, with India, with Japan, with Europe, and that balances out, as long as you make sure that China doesn't have too much leverage over any one Canadian company or sector, that can be part of a strategy, but it's got to be managed holistically that way. I think just turning and deepening relations with China, they will weaponize that and use that against us to constrain our own foreign policy freedom, and that would be very dangerous. And frankly, what we need to realize, if we want to be realistic about it, we need not just short-term pragmatism, but a long-term vision of principled realism to protect the country's interests and values. The United States will react negatively if we are perceived as tilting too rapidly toward China, and there would be costs to that. So this all needs to be balanced.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Mr. Kavrig, a pleasure as always. Thanks for your insights.
Thank you, Vashi.
Appreciate it. Coming up today, Trump's terror.
All right, we're going to skip over to the next piece. And this is the substance. This is the body of this video. This is going to be our goofball public safety minister, Gary the Chipmunk Tiger Man, Gary Anandasangaree. He's a loser and a liar. He lies straight to you with arrogance and the pompous fullness of a true liberal cabinet minister. He's a dirtbag. Don't let this asshole fool you for a second. He means to destroy your way of being. He's an alleged terrorist that's a cabinet minister, and there's no investigation into the alleged terrorism. Go ahead, Gary. Shoot your stupid face off.
Confirm that you still don't know how to say my last name, but I'm yeah, see. Thank you, colleagues, and I'm just honored to be back here. As you know, I've spent many years at this committee, and it's always a pleasure to be here with you. And I also want to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. We've made significant investments in Indigenous policing and community safety, including the First Nations and Inuit Policing Program, or FNIPP, and the First Nations and Inuit Policing Facilities Program, or FNIPFP. Budget 2024 committed $250 million over 5 years, plus $92.5 million in ongoing funding to the FNIPP and $200 million over 5 years to the FNIPP. These commitments build on Budget 2021, which invested $540.3 million over 5 years and $126.8 million ongoing to the FNIPP and $108.6 million over 5 years to FNIPFP. These programs are implemented based on a 52 federal, 48 provincial territorial cost-sharing ratio. Our expanded federal support has enhanced policing agreements and provided community safety officers in several jurisdictions. They have also stabilized the funding for existing First Nations and Inuit police services. We work in closely with provincial and territorial partners to implement these investments as part of our collective responsibilities for the administration of justice. We also work to sustain ongoing tripartite discussions with provinces and territories and First Nations and Inuit partners to assess which current policing and community safety approaches are meeting local needs. Les dirigeants et membres des Premières Nations et
First Nations and Inuit leaders and citizens will always play an important role in finding ways for us to improve safety outcomes in their very own communities.
Have long called for reform to how their police services are funded. They've also advocated for federal legislation that recognizes First Nations policing as an essential service. These calls were amplified by the release of the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, which called for reforms to the delivery of policing services in Indigenous communities. We have undertaken important work with First Nations, police services, and provincial and territorial partners on federal legislation that would recognize First Nations police services as essential services. That work is now guiding our program reform efforts. As the committee is aware, in March 2024, the Auditor General released her report on FNIPP, recommending reforms to improve program governance and to ensure positive outcomes. And I'm happy to tell you that these reforms have been made. We have recently updated the FNIPP terms and conditions to be more flexible and less burdensome for funding recipients. These represent an important initial step in efforts to modernize the program, most significantly with regard to how we fund First Nations and Inuit police services. Monsieur le Président, nous savons qu'il n'y...
Chair, we know that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to policing.
We know there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Les priorités des approches et matières de service.
Policing priorities and policing approaches change according to local circumstances.
A key feature of our reforms and support our shared goal of improving community safety and policing outcomes in First Nations and Inuit community. We will continue to work closely with First Nations and Inuit communities as well as the provincial and territorial governments to advance this important work. And Mr. Chair, let me just conclude by thanking the committee for the study that's undertaken, and I look forward to the report that will inform further progress on our part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will go to the first round of questions. MP Zimmer for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and again, good to see you, Minister, back in committee. OPP Inspector Marcel Baudin, when testifying last week in this committee, when asked if using already stretched thin police resources to go after lawful firearms owners said, quote, focusing on nefarious activity and organized crime is better bang for our buck. Inspector Baudin is a senior leader in Indigenous policing for the entire province of Ontario. So first question, Minister, do you think it is better to use already stretched thin police resources to go after criminals or go after law-abiding First Nations and Inuit firearms owners?
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer, for that question, and good to be back here at this committee. I want to just, first of all, acknowledge the work of the OPP, and I want to acknowledge...
Minister, time is very short, so the question is very specific. So if you could answer the question, that would be appreciated.
Sure. The program that you are referencing contemplates using off-duty police officers and those who are not doing as part of their regular duties. And it is clear that there will be additional resources available for them that will help them with the work that is being tasked.
Well, Minister, what we heard clear from many witnesses at committee was that police resources, it's very difficult to just get the basics covered in community. And so when asked, okay, you're going to have to go and now use those already stretched thin resources, as I just said, now to go after law-abiding firearms owners. So if there's this great pool of officers and recruits that you're holding in queue, I guess, to go after law-abiding firearms owners' firearms, I think it'd be best to let them know because they have some pretty significant issues in community. But my second question, I'll start with. Minister, we have heard from many witnesses, as I said, over the last several weeks in this committee, that the RCMP management in Ottawa are having a difficult time doing the basic community policing assignments in First Nations and Inuit communities. And to me, and I think it was clear even over the last couple of weeks, the RCMP lacks sufficient resources, and it's a problem. When I was in Cambridge Bay a while ago, the first concern brought to me by the Inuit members of the Canadian Rangers was that they were worried their hunting firearms, namely the SKS, would be banned by your Liberal government. Your fellow Liberal MP, Natalie Provost, said on September 23rd, we have to find a solution to ban the SKS. Do you agree with your colleague that you want to ban the SKS, yes or no?
With respect to the SKS, I've said this in another committee before. What we intend to do is have an expert panel that comprises the RCMP undertake the study on the SKS.
So the question is yes or no. I think at this time, is it yes or no? Are you going to ban the SKS? Because your colleague seems to be very emphatic and want that to happen. What's your answer today, Minister? Is it yes or no?
Mr. Zimmer, nothing is conclusive. What I can assure you right now, as part of the assault-style firearm compensation program, there are 2,500 firearms that are the subject of the buyback and that are subject to the prohibition, and that does not include the SKS.
Not as of yet. Okay. Okay, next question. Every First Nations police service is tripartite, as you know, meaning Ottawa pays most of the bill. We have heard from many First Nations chiefs and First Nations police chiefs say they simply aren't going to participate in your gun confiscation scheme because it uses needed officers and resources to go after honest, lawful Inuit and First Nations people instead of criminals. If they refuse to participate in the gun confiscation scheme, will you cut their funding?
The assault-style compensation program is a voluntary program on two fronts. First, for those who have prohibited weapons, they have the option of either disabling the unit or turning that in for compensation.
How is that? How is that voluntary? You're making somebody either turn it in or decommission the firearm.
If I may, Mr. Zimmer,
go ahead.
Let me finish the second part of this.
Yes, please.
It is also voluntary on the part of the law enforcement, the police of jurisdiction. So there are, again, if a police service does not or is not able to participate, there are other means by which this program will be implemented. So it is not contingent on the police services.
Okay, so let me just ask, because my time's just about out. So you're saying today that if police services choose to not participate in the gun confiscation scheme, they're okay to opt out?
Well, it is an opt-in. It's not an opt-out. So
that's what you said. Opt-in is the same as opt-out, Minister. To be frank.
No. I mean, we will have a bilateral agreement with the police of jurisdiction if they want to take part in the program, and that's the manner in which the program will be delivered.
Well, I'll tell you this, and even this is from the AFN chief, pretty much from every witness that we've heard from. They don't want to use those resources to go after law-abiding firearm owners, whether it's in Inuit or First Nation communities. The message was quite clear. And the question was, will they participate? And there was an emphatic no in many cases, and even, like I said, with the Inspector Baudin. So, Minister, I think you have a challenge on your hands to, one thing to have, confiscate law-abiding firearms owners' firearms, but I don't think you have willing partners in the police forces across this country and First Nations communities to help you do it. Thank you.
And that's the time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, we have Jaime for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing today. We've heard quite a bit of frustration from First Nations leaders around the lack of First Nations police in their communities. And we've heard testimony from some communities like Eskasoni that said that at one point 30 years ago that close to 90% of their police were actually Mi'kmaq community members. And they spoke about how important it was in de-escalating situations for police to show up that the community knows. We heard other testimony from other areas and other jurisdictions that talked about when someone comes to check on someone, whether it's a mental health check, whether they're coming to the door for the first time, it really de-escalates the situation by having someone who speaks the language, someone who's known in the community. And when we heard from the national chief said that, you know, we need to ensure that we are having more Indigenous, First Nations RCMP. And I'm thinking about in my lifetime, all of the people that I've known that have tried to go to the RCMP from Mi'kmaq communities that were smart enough, they passed all those tests, they were physically fit enough, they passed all those tests, but for some reason, when it came time to do the interviews, that they were weeded out for some reason, they didn't pass. And I guess my question is, how do we ensure that more First Nations are making it into the RCMP? How can we ensure First Nations language speakers are prioritized by the RCMP? And how can you as minister help us push to ensure that these communities that are talking about these frustrations actually have an ability to see movement from our government?
Thank you, Jaime, for that very important question. And look, you know, I've spent my entire life talking and working on the issues of representation, and the work with the RCMP is one of the continuation of the work that I've been doing. The RCMP currently have 6.5% of their personnel, their frontline officers, are Indigenous. I self-identify as Indigenous. I was over at Depot several months ago. There was a troop just from Makivik, so Makivik Police Service, which is northern Quebec, someone that RCMP trains. But more importantly, there were a number of individuals who were identified as First Nations, and it is work that we're continuing. I fully agree with you that there is a need for representation within the community. So if at Eskasoni, for example, and I was able to visit you last year, we will, you know, need to strive better to have that representation. As part of the 1,000 new RCMP officers that we will be hiring, one of the deep conversations I've had with both Deputy Commissioner as well as the Commissioner is about ensuring that there's representation, especially in Northern Canada, especially involving Inuit, because we know that, again, location is important, and rather than bringing people from the south to the north, it's important to have sustainable officers who are in the ground. With your permission, I may ask Deputy Commissioner to maybe add and speak about the work that they've been doing.
Absolutely. But before Commissioner Larkin, you speak, I just wanted to also frame it as we're not just looking for Indigenous policemen, but we're looking for First Nations language speakers, because if they can speak the language when they come to the door, like how can the RCMP help ensure that First Nations language speakers are prioritized as part of the 1,000 new RCMP that we've gotten?
Thank you, Minister, and through you, Mr. Chair. Just some quick data to bring you sort of into current context. For this fiscal year, we've had 405 applicants that self-identify as Indigenous. Out of that 405, 37 have already graduated from Depot, and this year more than 5% of our graduates from Depot identify as First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. I can tell you that it is a consistent priority with a specialized Indigenous recruitment strategy, and in particular around the Indigenous languages. I do want to highlight in December of 2023, our official languages branch, and where I serve as a champion, we actually launched a culturally innovative approach to launch an educational program to ensure that regular members and those that are serving in the more than 550 Indigenous communities actually also bring cultural competency, including language. We currently have 140 regular members that are ongoing language training in 7 different languages in the Indigenous Indigenous community. We hope to continue to expand that in 2026. And so we also celebrated our 31st anniversary of Indigenous Pre-Cadet, where we bring young Indigenous individuals that are interested in policing to RCMP Depot to have an experience, and we've seen tremendous success. And so I want to reaffirm our commitment as a part of the 1,000. We'll have a specific approach to onboarding and implementing more Indigenous regular members into our organization. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Stevenson.
Oh.
Schmale, sorry about that. You are.
That's okay. Both start with an S. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing here today. Last time we spoke, Minister, at the committee level, you were here in your previous role as Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, and at that time we were doing a study on Indigenous procurement, specifically the use of fake Indigenous identity in order to obtain access to government contracts. My question here relates to a letter I submitted to you earlier today. It's signed by you on December 13th, 2024. It's in response to a letter that was sent to you by somebody named Eagle Eyes, aka Jeffrey, who's claiming to be the Grand Council representative of the Alliance of Indigenous Nations. Now, a quick Google search of that name shows some pretty questionable results and to the legitimacy of this, whether they are Indigenous at all. And unfortunately, there is a band that just popped up recently called the Kawartha Lakes First Nation that is claiming Indigenous status, that is claiming 15,000 square kilometers of bands within the Williams Treaty area. Scugog, the Chippewas of Georgina, Rama, Alderville, Hiawatha, Curve Lake, just to name a few. Now, Minister, the so-called chief of this organization is claiming that this letter confirms that you signed off that they are legitimate. Is that true?
It's not true. Look, the recognition of indigeneity is a complex process. There's modern treaties that will recognize certain groups as Indigenous based on the modern treaties that have been signed. There's treaties, historical, treaties that again recognize specific groups. There's also, in the modern context, it is within the context of the Indian Act. So if this particular community does not belong to the Indian Act band, and this does not, then the process of recognition is an onerous process through what's called Section 35 recognition. That involves enormous amount of work on the part of the community, but also on the part of Crown Indigenous Relations, as well as Department of Justice, that over time will establish the historical basis for that recognition. And I can affirm, Mr. Schmale, that in this case, that did not happen. This was what you gave me this afternoon is a form letter response to a letter that was received in my previous portfolio. It is a courtesy response, and frankly, it does not in any way recognize the rights of this particular group.
Okay, perfect. So no legal authority. There's a process. They're not legitimate.
Well, and just to be clear,
and I do have a few other questions too. So
I'll be very brief. All of us receive letters. All of us, respond to correspondence. That does not imply, other than a courtesy response, it doesn't imply, it should not imply anything further than that.
Okay. So, Minister, going back to the policing issue, in 2019, 2020, your government announced a desire to make Indigenous policing an essential service. We've gone way past that. We're 2025 now. There was, to Sebastian's point earlier, there was nothing really in the budget regarding Indigenous policing other than a piece of a nation's jurisdiction, which I think was a positive step. But at the same time, your budget is also showing that you're going to spend more on going after licensed firearm owners than you are spending on Operation Reassurance as a NATO operation, securing the border and hiring Canadian Border Services agents. So how is this a justifiable use of dollars when we have a study here with Indigenous policing and nations saying one-year programs, short-staffed, burnout, crimes going up? How can you justify spending it on legal firearms owners when there are problems all around you?
And to be clear, the dollars that's mentioned in the assault style relating to the firearms buyback program was previously budgeted. It's really not new additional dollars. Having said that, I think with respect to the work on policing as an essential service, I think that's work that we need to do. I would say that there is a need for additional funding, and we will work with colleagues here, but we will also work with First Nations and Inuit leadership, as well as communities, to ensure that there's additional resources in the upcoming years.
So we've had testimony about response times lacking in a lot of these circumstances because they are rural and remote. So that is a problem for police services to respond to existing ones. How much longer are we and these nations supposed to wait before this legislation, if it ever comes forward? Like, we're going on 5+ years now. Has there been any headway here? Are we getting any closer to something happening?
My approach is slightly different, Mr. Schmale. So, I came into this portfolio in the last 5 months, and one of the realizations that I have on this is that we need to get the funding before the legislation comes in. There's a fair bit of work to do. I know there's been co-development of legislation, but I think given the current economic context, what we want to do is, first of all, ensure that we have funding. Secondly, with the national chief, I have.
Well, I think a good place to get funding is the firearms program.
That's time.
You're going after the wrong
That's time.
people.
We're over time. Brendan, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for being here, Minister, and thank you to the officials as well. Minister, and I've worked with you in your various roles over the last few years. You were, of course, Parliamentary Secretary to Justice, and then Crown Indigenous Minister, now Public Safety Minister. So I know you've had ample conversations about community safety. And one of the specific topics that relates to Indigenous policing is, of course, the community safety officer programs and how they blend or work with existing more traditional police services. And of course, Yukon offers many models of how this can be developed and worked. So I wanted to, and just to remind anyone participating in this meeting that the community safety officers really focus on prevention, on de-escalation, on social and community support. So it really kind of complements the more traditional enforcement role of police officers, and also part of this. Part of the process is developing a community plan that really is rooted in what the community priorities are when it comes to community safety. And we've had House of Wolf and other witnesses speak to the value of this program. So part of the issue, though, is about federal resourcing for CSO programming as a segue to kind of the bigger picture of financing and resourcing Indigenous policing. And part of the uncertainty is also over which federal department lead. Just talking through the number of portfolios that you've had, there is overlap in many of these areas. So I just wonder if you can comment on what you've learned about CSO programming and how that could fit into and complement Indigenous policing and traditional policing.
Thank you, Dr. Hanley. When you ask this question, I can't help but acknowledge that the first treaty implementation on administration of justice was in Yukon, and I know it set a mark, I think, for others, and obviously the notion of self-determination over policing administration of justice, I think is crucially important, and ultimately that's where we need to get to. In the interim is where all these programs come in. With respect to community safety officers, we have a budget about $13 million. I know there's about 10 agreements across Canada that have a number of community safety officers who are working in community. The opportunities that they're able to do some of the non-policing work, including issues around mental health, issues around public safety, without the enforcement capabilities. And it is proven to be a workable model. I do think there's some challenges because when there's security issues, then you probably do need an actual police officer there. But for many communities, in conjunction with the policing service, it can be optimized. And I do fundamentally believe that we need to start and continue to expand these programs.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to follow on some of the questions from my colleagues from around the table, because we have repeatedly heard as part of this study and of course previous studies about the struggles with lack of financial support and often the lack of parity between Indigenous policing services through the various agreements and again more traditional policing services in other areas of the country, and how that really affects the ability to retain officers, and of course the huge advantage that that Indigenous police officers who are from the community, who are trained and comfortable with the language, who are culturally sensitive, and I recognize what Commissioner Larkin has said about the efforts to step up education, but nevertheless. My question is how we can help you support that need to look for financial support that is necessary, even as a preamble to legislation.
A brief answer, please.
Look, currently we have 36 bilateral and 147 tripartite agreements with the provinces. That's a 52-48 split. More provinces are coming on board, and even with the provinces that are already participating, they're expecting us to do more, and that's actually a good thing, because it does require all of us at the table. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, when we met federal, provincial, territorial first ministers on public safety and justice, this was a critical part of the conversation. And the commitment I made, and the commitment I will make again today, is to make sure that we work towards sustainable long-term funding, and of course the notion of essential service is important, but it also requires the provinces to undertake the same level of ambition when we get there. So it's not just a federal legislation, it does need to bring the provinces and territories on board as well.
Thank you. Next we have Billy for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Earlier, my colleague, Mr. Schmale, was mentioning a similar question in that asking for a timeline for the commitment to the legislation to being essential. And you finished off by saying also that the economic challenges are a factor in that. Is that correct?
I mean, you heard what I said, and there are obviously some difficulties right now on the fiscal frame, but I think what's important, and what the Prime Minister has reiterated, is with respect to the critical files around reconciliation. We're continuing the path, and our commitment is to ensure that reconciliation moves forward, and services are not reduced in any way.
Sir, if you're saying there are economic challenges, you're running an $80 billion deficit. What economic challenges are stopping you from protecting First Nations and Indigenous communities? Good point.
Well, look, there's a number of areas, and I will be the first one to admit, and I have admitted here, that there are gaps. There is certainly disparity in the levels of services that over decades of neglect, we're here. The last 10 years, I would say we have made some significant progress in terms of closing the gap. There's still gaps out there, and there's still work that we need to do as a government, as a country, and as any successive government, there will be work to do. This is another area where that work needs to continue.
You mentioned earlier that you, for the last 10 years as a parliamentarian, your primary focus has been on reconciliation. Are you the right minister? You've been the CERNAC minister. You know intimately this file. You know the communities intimately. Now you're the public safety minister. You refuse to give a date to get the legislation done to make it essential. Are you the right person to get this done?
Well, I will leave that to your judgment, but I do have a record here that I can defend with respect to reconciliation. If you would like me to enumerate that, I'd be glad to, but I don't think that's necessary.
Yesterday, during the budget submission, the finance minister had the audacity to say, "We build for those who follow us." I'm reminded of the 7-generation principle rooted in Indigenous teachings. We're reminded that every decision we take must consider its impact for future generations. While these communities are in crisis, and they have been in crises for decades, you refuse to go to essential and keep these communities in crisis by going year to year with this programming. How can they get out of crises? How can you say that they're for 7 generations when you refuse to keep them in crisis with these 1-year programs and not declaring it essential?
Good point. Mr. Morin, I would not be the person certainly to tell you, because I think your lived experience and your leadership speaks for itself. What I can say is that over several generations, there's been a number of policies that have deeply and adversely impacted Indigenous people, particularly First Nations people, particularly with respect to the Indian Act.
How many more generations is it
so
going to take?
Look, I wish I can answer that question. I wish I can say it's going to be in the next 10 years. What I can say is we've taken meaningful steps that, over the last decade, we have changed the trajectory on where we were going, including on child welfare, including on the recognition of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, which the 10th anniversary is coming up, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit calls to justice. And we've been advancing on these issues for a number of years. And there's work to do. And I will be the first one to say there's work to do, and this is work that we need to do together, and in a manner that actually advances reconciliation, in a manner that doesn't politicize this issue. And I would love to work across the aisle with you and many other colleagues I've been able to work with in the past, and I'll invite you to continue this conversation, because I recognize the frustration that you have. And it's the same level of frustration that I've heard in probably 60, 70 communities that I've been across in the last year or so. And it is work that
One more question, sir, while I still have the time. You cite the investment of the 1,000 police officers for RCMP. We've heard this scathing report of the Auditor General on the failures of your government and the RCMP. How come First Nations Indigenous policing were left out of that? How come there's no Métis also references in the budget to keeping those communities safe?
Good point. The RCMP is a federal. There's a distinction in terms of the RCMP. The role is they offer contract policing in so many provinces, including yours, and Manitoba, Saskatchewan, a range of provinces have what we call contract policing, and that is we have a contract until 2032. And we certainly have a desire, and the RCMP has a desire to continue that service to those constituents, to those citizens. The investments that are going in is going towards federal policing, which has to do with the border, about enforcement on anti-terrorism legislation, on
First Nations community borders.
That's time, please. Thank you. Jeanette for 5 minutes.
Good job.
Merci beaucoup, Minister.
Jeanette, thank you very much, Minister, for being with us here.
Thank you, Chair. The Auditor General, Minister, and Indigenous police chiefs are very concerned about short-term funding under the First Nations and Inuit policing program. You have mentioned that we're waiting 5+ years for this. Yet, under this budget, your government is spending more on the war on licensed firearms owners than you are on Operation Reassurance, a NATO mission, securing the border by hiring Canadian Border Service officers. How can you run an $80 billion deficit and have a program that costs more than a NATO mission and say, we're going to be safer in Canada?
So, Mr. Schmale, I don't, I can go into the reasons for the assault-style firearms program, but I can also say that the funding that you reference.
Are we able to define an assault? Have we landed on a definition
I think
of assault rifle?
there are 2,500 assault-style firearms that are part of the prohibition. That are there's 3 different orders in council.
Hunting rifles and shotguns.
Well, there's 2,500 firearms, and maybe Mr. Larkin.
But no, Minister, before you go, so if you have a restricted firearms license, your name is run under the policing database every single day. It's basically being on parole every single day. These are law-abiding people. Okay, you are going to go and confiscate some of their firearms that they legally purchased after obtaining training and a license. We have a NATO mission that is getting less money than this confiscation program that isn't going to make anyone any safer. How can you justify that?
Just for the record, the program you're referencing was previously budgeted, and those
You're
dollars
still spending the money, and we're $80 billion in the hole. Should we not see a result?
Well, those dollars.
A result would be making Canada safer, or fixing the Indigenous policing program that we've just talked about many times over again. That is getting basically no attention.
We could do all 3, Mr. Schmale.
Well, how about we stop going after firearms owners that are licensed?
That's time. Liberals for 2 minutes, please.
Minister, Commissioner, we've heard testimony that, when the Mi'kmaq communities had tribal police, that while that was a better model, that they were happier with, that the project was set up to fail because of inadequate funding. But we also heard that, for the big crimes that you need RCMP support for major crimes, major investigations that most tribal police don't have the capacity to undertake. With that in mind, we've seen communities take on jurisdiction over things like education. We've seen provincial Indigenous groups take over health. And so I'm wondering, is there a possibility for us to look at a hybrid model that not only builds on the community's ability to have their own tribal police, but one that gets collaboration from the RCMP in a flexible and collaborative approach?
Go ahead. I think that was directed to you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. President. In short, policing of communities is a democracy. It's one of the strengths of our nation, the way that police services are developed across our country. And certainly the RCMP's commitment is we would work in collaboration with public safety and a specific Indigenous community to ensure their success. And so the national infrastructure and the work required to operate police services, we have full commitment to ensuring that that infrastructure and that support at the national perspective will and always be there. And equally, any Indigenous police service, including the current self-administered Indigenous police services in Canada, if they require RCMP support, whether it be through contract Indigenous policing, specialized policing, or federal policing, let me reaffirm we will be there to support that community, that police service, to ensure the safety of the residents. And so, again, we're very open to that dialogue and discussion to ensure the evolution of policing in Canada.
Thank you very much. Jamie, for 6 minutes, please.
Sorry, say that again?
Yeah.
There's no opening statements?
No opening statements, I believe. They're just here to answer some questions.
You don't have any opening statements? Nothing? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Chair. I guess my time starts now. Starting now. Okay. Well, thank you very much to our witnesses for coming in. We've, as I mentioned in the first hour, and what we've heard in testimony, is the ongoing issue that being highlighted by the Auditor General and Indigenous police chiefs themselves regarding the very short-term funding models that make it very difficult to recruit, to plan, to retain. Are you hearing that with the partners you're working with in the field?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, it is something that we hear. It is something that we have heard in the past. And as the minister indicated earlier, it is something that we are working on. We have had some successes, and we're still working with all the provinces and territories to ensure that we whenever we have a lesson learned that is successful, to apply it elsewhere. And as the minister said, some agreements now have been signed for much longer time, up to 10 years.
Okay. Now, in terms of the RCMP, are there conversations where your jurisdictions may or may overlap? Is there conversations regarding efforts to mutually work together in order to keep these communities safe? I know obviously response times is a major issue that's being addressed in this committee, but I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Thank you for the question, Chair. In the Yukon, which is the area that I am responsible for policing in, there are several conversations at the community level, the First Nations government level, and also the territorial government about community safety initiatives that can be collaborated on and requirements that the communities may need.
Okay, so in those northern communities that don't have a full-time Indigenous police service that rely on the RCMP, and I get it, the challenges you're dealing with, what's being done to ensure that there is maybe some constant coverage or that reliability of service? Not to say that it's not happening, but maybe you can explain what's being done there to ensure that those communities are getting the service.
Thank you for that question. The Yukon is fortunate in that the vacancy rate for our CMP members is quite low. It hovers anywhere around 9 to 10% for both soft and hard vacancies at any given time, and that is for the total amount of police officers in the Yukon. There are various things that we do to try and ensure that no community is left without dedicated policing service in community. That's within our national backup policy that is overseen by me and my leadership team in the Yukon. We have dedicated relief teams that are through the contract police service that go out into communities when there's expected and unexpected vacancies that occur, whether that be life issues that come up with police officers. But the Yukon has been fairly stable in our staffing and in our presence in every Yukon community.
Well, it is a beautiful place to live, especially in the summertime. Winter, I'm not a winter guy, so.
I will disagree with you.
Dr. Hanley disagrees,
well.
but I don't know. It's pretty darn cold up there. Anyway, we heard during testimony previous that recruitment with Indigenous officers is always a challenge for whatever reason, right? Geography or whatever, within the RCMP for a whole bunch of reasons. What steps have you or the service in general taking to ensure that you're reaching out to Indigenous communities to get those voices and those bodies into your ranks?
So thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Again, when we look at the challenges that we face, we provide service to 550 Indigenous communities, and 450 of those are First Nations, 40 are Inuit communities, and 58 are Métis communities. That being said, from a recruitment perspective, we have a lot of young Canadians that are actually interested in joining the mission and serving their nation as an RCMP officer. One of our focuses, though, is to ensure a diverse, gender-based approach to recruiting. And so, as I alluded to, in this year alone, our applications from Canadian citizens is significant, and we're actually facing, not a recruiting issue. It's really around processing and training and expediting those pieces. But specifically to Indigenous recruitment, as I alluded, we have this year alone 405 self-identified. Last year, 59 First Nation, Indigenous, and Métis applicants graduated from Depot. This year already, we've actually trained 37, and that represents about 5% of all graduates coming through Depot in Regina. Many of those go across the country. Many of those return to their community. And in particular, as the minister alluded earlier, we're at 6.5% of Indigenous regular members, and although that exceeds the majority of government services in the country, but we won't rest on our laurels. And as a result of that, we have a specific Indigenous recruitment strategy. We have community engagement teams. We're looking at opportunities as we bring young Indigenous individuals that are interested in the RCMP to Depot to take them through an experience, through a learning piece. And equally at the same time, our members that are deployed that are non-Indigenous, we've worked really hard on cultural competency. We acknowledge the past, we're working on the present, but we want a better future generation. And so the cultural competency piece, when a regular member who is not Indigenous is deployed to one of the 550 communities, they arrive with a community cultural competency package. They have a whole concept and understanding of where they're heading to work, and that allows them to slowly build trust, integrate into the community. And of course, naturally, our goal, though, is to have representation in all the communities that reflects the community that we provide service to. This is one of our key priorities. Is it perfect? No, but a continued work in progress through our contract Indigenous policing program. And so again, we continue to see the recruitment numbers of those that identify as Indigenous increasing.
Thank you. We're going to go to the next.
And our goal is to move it forward.
You'll be able to pull that out probably in another answer, but that's time. Brendan, please.
Thank you very much, all of you, for being here. And I'm supposed to be in two places at once, so I might have to leave in the middle of my period. But I did want a chance, Chief Superintendent Ellis, to ask you a few questions and give us maybe a very brief portrait of policing in the territory. You recently took on the commanding role. You've been dedicated to service in the Yukon for many years, so I know that, and you've established relationships all around the territory. So give me a quick picture of what it's like to police in the Yukon.
It's on. Thank you very much, Member of Parliament for Yukon and Chair. The Yukon is a remote and northern landscape. The RCMP has a long history in the Yukon, but I would describe it as a progressive policing environment in the Yukon, given the landscape of self-government agreements for 11 out of 14 First Nations. The remaining 3 First Nations are Indian Act nations, but have many initiatives underway that are extremely progressive. The policing landscape in the Yukon is continually evolving and modernizing and needing to be effective every day and in a sustained way for Yukon. Like I mentioned, the vacancy rate is fortunately very low. There is a robust contract policing, resourcing, and framework. There's also equally a robust First Nations and Inuit policing program resourcing framework as well. At this time, there are 11 First Nations, 11 out of 14, that have active community tripartite agreements with Canada and Yukon. The RCMP provides service within letters of expectation to those communities, but all Yukon communities receive services directly from us. There's been a few opportunities of success that I'll just mention here that's been through some funding and some resourcing through the First Nations and Inuit policing program. One of those is to the community of Burwash Landing, population approximately 120. It is a First Nations community of the Kluane First Nation on Kluane Lake, Yukon. It is on the most western border of Yukon and Alaska. The closest police detachment has been Haines Junction Detachment, which was about an hour and 20 minutes by car. And then the next one is the Beaver Creek Detachment, which is on the U.S.-Canada border. That community had not seen dedicated policing since 1946 until last February, when 2 positions were provided to the Kluane First Nation, and they signed on to a community tripartite agreement with Canada and Yukon to have 2 positions that were dedicated to them. Those positions are staffed. The infrastructure discussions are taking place, and the letter of expectation is fully engaged with that First Nation. We saw the need in that community to be more present, to build more meaningful relationships, not just on the drive-by when we're heading to Beaver Creek or vice versa. The real policing needs were acute in that community. Some of the calls for service that we were getting out of our Haines Junction detachment were extremely serious. Some calls for public safety, including guns, impaired driving. And we were on the back foot of developing those relationships that are key and critical to not only responding to those issues, but participating in prevention exercises with the First Nation to keep people safe. So I would say that the Yukon, it's evolving, it's progressive, and the RCMP wishes to remain doing so in the Yukon for many years.
Left. I know a lot of chiefs have come to this committee and frustrated with the fact that our CMP don't enforce ban bylaws. A lot of them have been talking about trying to remove drug dealers, trying to remove people from houses that they suspect are selling drugs and hurting their communities. Is it realistic for communities to expect RCMP to enforce bylaws around removing drug dealers from their community's boundaries?
Thank you for the question. And in short, yes, it is realistic. RCMP officers can and will. They enforce federal, municipal, provincial legislation, as well as bylaws under the Indian Act and others. And our approach is that, yes, we're working on national policy to build consistency across the nation. We're working with other First Nations Chiefs of Police Association because it is a national challenge. But one of the strengths of policing in Canada is also officer independence and officer discretion, and that forms a part of it. So where appropriate, RCMP officers will and they can enforce ban bylaws.
Everyone has an opinion.
Community go about doing so. First, we've heard communities say that they wanted to do this. I know you're saying this at a committee here with us, that you can do this. And communities are asking, why haven't their RCMP done this? I guess the question is, how can we ensure that this is done in a collaborative, flexible way that acknowledges the community's right to do so?
And that's the time, so...
Maybe written?
Yeah, you could send it in writing if you would like.
Thank you.
William, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'll just continue on Deputy Lemire's questioning on, you mentioned just previously that you had a lot of statistics, and could we get you to perhaps have some of those spending per province broken down by jurisdiction as to who's actually participating on how much on what those levels are? And with that, could you also break down as to, is there a difference on a per capita basis with regards to those that are doing self-policing versus those that are covered by RCMP? I don't know if it's Mr. Walraven or not on that.
Please go ahead. Okay. Thank you for the question. We don't have it broken down in terms of what my team manages as normal data on a per capita basis. But I think on a substantive response to your question, one of the points of comparison that I think some First Nations make, and I know that First Nations in Alberta make this point of comparison, is how much funding on a per capita or a per officer basis are we seeing going to First Nation police services versus how much on a per capita officer is being subsidized under other aspects of the program, like a community tripartite agreement. We are making those links in substantive funding agreement negotiations, and it is an informal point of comparison that we do use.
Thank you. I guess that leads to where I was kind of going in that I have, I believe, 7 different reserves in my riding. Most of them, actually all of them are covered by RCMP at this point, but they have looked at, they're looking at why don't they go to the other one, and funding is part of the reason that they're looking at that. But part of it too, and might have to go to Mr. Larkin on this one. I like a lot of the stats from Ms. Ellis, but I don't know whether you can give us, because Yukon specific, whether you can give us Alberta numbers as to what you have for vacancy rates, and whether or not you can tell us when we have higher vacancy rates, if you've got anything for numbers for response times in serving the Indigenous communities, especially in our more remote areas. Mine's rather large area, and I know I've talked to a few RCMP that have said that, you know, they 400, 500, 600 square kilometers is per officer. It's rather large, and so timing has been much. So when they have those vacancies, that's why we want to know if you can give me any information on that one.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I can give you specifics in writing in the coming weeks around specifics around the breakout within Alberta.
That'd be good.
Our general range of vacancy in Alberta is in the range of, and it fluctuates between 7 and 10%. And Deputy Commissioner DeRue then does allocate resources through the province to ensure, as my colleague Chief Superintendent Ellis alluded, that we comply with backup policy, service, 24-hour response, etc. One of the strengths of us being the provincial police in the province of Alberta is the ability to deploy resources and move resources, and certainly have the equipment to move resources. But I can certainly break it down, particularly if you're interested in, you know, the RCMP serving your Indigenous communities in Alberta. Happy to do that.
Yeah, that would also probably have to get this in writing as well. If you could go on to whether you have any stats in regarding to those that are repeat offenders, and whether or not those that are out on bail being reoffending on that sort of thing. If there's any differences, or if you can give me any stats with regards to the remote areas with Indigenous and northern communities compared to, say, some of the other ones that are in more urban areas.
We're happy to provide data. Obviously, rural crime is a significant priority for us, not only in Alberta, but obviously across the country. The majority of communities and the land mass that we provide policing to is largely in the rural sector of Canada. And so clearly our strategies around crime reduction and dealing with violent crime is very much focused on rural, but happy to work with K Division in particular, which is Alberta, that you represent, to provide you more specific data, and equally happy to connect you with Deputy Commissioner Trevor DeRue, our commanding officer in the province.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the 5 minutes. Jaime for 5 minutes.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I'm a little bit
extension under the
concerns that were raised last year when they called for a national inquiry. I feel that there has to be adequate steps that come out of here. And what I'd really like to, I would have really liked to ask this question to Commissioner DeHame, but he's not here. So what I really need to get is a commitment from the RCMP to meet with the AFN's national chief. And I hope that you can take that back. And I hope that we can get a response in writing before the end of the
Opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah. So the answer is listing IRGC as a terrorist organization in Canada is the only way and the most effective way to combat this. Otherwise, we're going to continue watching the same organization hurting and
over. But Ms. Poon then set up her own lobbying firm that was lobbying this government, that was lobbying Minister Boissonneau's own department, and that had received $110 million in government contracts as Ms. Poon's company was paying Mr. Boissonneau. Mr. Boissonneau was not transparent. In fact, he attempted to hide his connection to Ms. Poon's lobbying firm by in the declaration that he made to the ethics commissioner, in which he hid behind the numbered company, not the name that the company or the lobbying for the company held itself out as. As a result, the ethics commissioner was unaware that the firm that was paying Mr. Boissonneau was lobbying his department and other departments within this government in securing contracts. Mr. Boissonneau said, well, there's nothing to see here because the payments that he was receiving from Ms. Poon's lobbying company were in relation to accounts receivable from work that he did prior to his election, except for the fact that he never did any work for Ms. Poon's company. So why is he being paid by Ms. Poon's company, a company he did no work for, a company that was lobbying his department, that was that was benefiting handsomely in securing $110 million in contracts? Mr. Boissonneau has provided no explanation for why he was being paid by Ms. Poon's company. It doesn't add up. We need to probe that. We also need to understand why it is that, you know, Mr. Boissonneau hid behind a numbered company. Why was he not transparent? Was it just a sloppiness on his part? Now, he says that he was cleared by the ethics commissioner. He hasn't been cleared by the ethics commissioner. And when he was asked about whether he's been cleared by the lobbying commissioner, as far as I understand, it's on the lobbying commissioner's radar, this issue. So there are many questions to be asked of Mr. Boissonneau in regards to what is at the very least a very questionable arrangement of having one's business partner lobby the department of the minister who's connected to that individual who's being paid by that company as that company is securing money from the federal government for clients. But then there is the issue around Global Health Imports Corporation and the question of where's Randy? Who is Randy? This is a company that Mr. Boissonneau set up just at the beginning of the pandemic. He had no experience in the PPE business, neither did Mr. Anderson, whose career was that of a hockey coach. But amazingly, they set up this company right at the time of the pandemic and began to secure millions of dollars in government contracts for PPE. Raises some questions about how they managed to.
All right, gang. So we're going to wrap it up. My name's Aaron. This is Canadian Looney. It's a bit of a rough day here. I kind of feel like I've got my voice back, but this is like, not that you want to call it an anniversary, but my dad committed the S word. You can't even say that on here, which is very frustrating. Like, because he jumped off a bridge.
To be visiting with a fisherman who will tell us about his very enjoyable hobby. Now, I would like to see you all through our magic mirror. Romper, bumper, stomper, boo, tell me, do. Magic mirror, please tell me today, did all of my friends have fun at play? I see all of my friends in Alberta. It's nice to see you. And I see Dan and Vivian. I see Marlon and Mona. I see Catherine and Harley. I see Anne and Elizabeth and Jane. I see Bert and Nicole, and I see you too. I hope to see you tomorrow, right here in Romp Room.
Bing bong, hot nuts, hey daddy do. Bing bong, tick tock, bebop boom.
Kick off your weekend with exciting CFL action when the Edmonton Eskimos tackle the BC Lions in Vancouver. Tomorrow night at 10:30 on CFTO TV.
You be a